In this lesson, we'll learn what UVs are and why they are so important to our texturing workflow. Okay, so I've got a very simple scene open here. Basically what we've got is a very simple piece of geometry. As a matter of fact, it's only a cube right here at the origin of my scene. Now, to the left of that, we have a little bit more complex piece of geometry that looks sort of like a crate that you might see, I don't know, maybe in a warehouse or maybe a Wild West type scene. Now, this crate has some textures that have been created for it. If we zoom in here pretty close, you can see here that there's sort of this nice aged and decayed paint that looks like it's chipping off to reveal the stain, or rather the texture of the wood underneath it. And we've even got sort of a logo or some type here that has been printed on the side of our crate. You can see here that it exists on that side right there on the front, but we're not seeing that type on most of the other sides. Now, we do have that type back here on the back, but we only have it in two places. So there is a very, very important step that you need to always consider when you are looking to maybe begin to start creating textures like these for an asset that you've just finished modeling. This step is called laying out the UVs for that asset. Now, this particular asset knows exactly where this logo for Capital Supply should fall because of those UVs. These UVs tell this particular asset that, okay, we're going to put the logo here on this particular area, but we're not going to put it up here. So you can think about this process of creating and laying out the UVs for your geometry very much like basically taking a 3D object and making cuts so that you can unfold that 3D object into 2D space. If you think about these textures over here on this crate, these are coming from flat, two-dimensional images, things that maybe you get on the internet or maybe you have created or edited inside of an application like Photoshop. These are 2D images, and in order to precisely wrap them around a 3D object, we need to create those UVs. So in looking at this cube right here, if you were to think about maybe beginning to cut this particular piece of geometry apart so that you could flatten it out in 2D space, where would you make your cuts? Well, the truth is that there's really not a wrong answer to that question, because there's a number of different ways that we could cut apart even something as simple as a cube and begin to lay out the faces or the UVs for that particular geometry. So we could come in here and we could maybe make a cut along every edge that you see here, which would basically take all 6 of these faces and free them from the other faces, so then they could be flattened out in 2D space individually. Or maybe we could take and make some cuts in the geometry to lay the geometry out something like this. If we were to sort of unfold it like that. Another perfectly acceptable way to make the cuts and flatten out this very simple cube. So, in looking at that here, let's just kind of relate this to the crate on the left. If this particular face correlated to kind of this front face of the cube, in the image that we lay on top of our UVs, basically we would want to make sure that our logo falls in this area right here. If this particular face right here correlated to kind of the top of the crate, then we would want to make sure that the logo did not fall here. Make sense? All right, great. Let me go ahead and just fold my cube back up here. So this process of creating and laying out UVs is very, very important. And there is one main location that you're going to go to work with these UVs. It's called the UV Texture Editor, and inside of Maya you can get to that in a couple of places. You can come over here to the Window menu, and if we come down you can see that we have a UV Texture Editor option right here. Or we can come over here in the Polygons menu set under Edit UVs, and again you can find that same option here at the bottom of this menu. Let me go ahead and open that up here. And you'll see here that a separate window opens up. It's called the UV Texture Editor, and we can navigate around inside the UV Texture Editor using pretty much the same keyboard shortcuts for zooming and panning as we can inside of Maya's viewport. So what you can see here is inside the UV Texture Editor, we have basically this large grid. This is going to be your texture space in the UV Texture Editor. But you don't want to have your UVs laid out all over this grid. There is a very specific place on this grid that you want your textures to fall. It's in this upper right-hand corner, this upper right-hand quadrant. So this area right here is commonly referred to as a 0 to 1 space, right here in the top right-hand corner. And if you're curious, the term UV is basically created from this grid right here. You have these numbers that run across it horizontally. That's going to be your U direction. These numbers that run vertically right through here, this is going to be your V direction. So you can actually plot things on this grid with numeric values in both the U and the V. Let me come over here and just kind of select my cube behind here. And that way what you can see here is that the UV layout for this cube looks really just the same as when I unfolded it a moment ago. We have 4 polygons that are stacked on top of each other here. And we have 2 right here, down here near the base of it, that are sort of attached to the right and to the left. Now, if I were to come in and apply a texture to this cube, let me just go ahead and do that here. I'm just going to drag and drop a texture onto that. What you can see here is I've applied basically sort of this checker pattern to the cube. Now, with this checker pattern, we have basically 16 squares on each face, 8 black ones and 8 white ones. So in looking at this, if I were to come up here and maybe just kind of show you what that looks like inside the UV Texture Editor, I'll just turn on the texture image there. And what you can see here, and this may be a little difficult to see in the video, let me just select this front face right here. So the texture that's appearing on this face right here is right down here. As a matter of fact, if I sort of toggle that, you can see that I have this face right here selected in my UVs. So basically, according to this image right here, these are the 16 squares that are appearing on the geometry right here. And they're appearing there because of the UV layout for this. All right, great. Let me just come over here and I want to show you another example really quickly. I'm going to kind of pan over to the left a little bit and I'm going to turn on a layer that I have here. Now, this particular cube right here, it looks a little different than this cube right here. And this particular cube is actually a NURBS cube. So when you're dealing with NURBS geometry, your UVs are going to work a little bit different than polygonal models like this one right here. So again, if I were to come over and open up my UV Texture Editor with the NURBS object selected, what you can see here is that the UVs look a little bit different. Let me come over and just click on the polygon cube, and then I'll click on this front area of the NURBS cube right here. So with a NURBS object like this one here, your NURBS, or rather your UVs, they look like they're really not there, but they are. You can see here that there's sort of a tic-tac-toe pattern that's laid onto this grid. But we can't come in here and select it and begin to manipulate these UVs with a NURBS object. These UVs are tied directly to the geometry because NURBS exist as patches. So what this means is basically for this front side of this NURBS cube, we are taking up really the entirety of this 0 to 1 space. Now if I was to come over here and maybe just begin to stretch this guy, let me just come over and sort of start to stretch this guy out. What you can see here is because we can't edit those UVs, that texture is stretching as well. So, because remember, those UVs take up this entire 0 to 1 space, we no longer have geometry that matches the basically scaling of the UVs, and thus our texture is going to be a bit distorted. You can see sort of by the elongated checker pattern on this plane here. All right, great. I'm going to go ahead and undo that here, and we'll just deselect and close. Fantastic. Now, anytime you're wanting to get started laying out the UVs for your geometry, a really good place to start would be with a projection. So from here, we're going to move on to our next lesson, and we're going to learn a little bit about